Hello, good morning, and welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Rescue efforts underway after Russian missile hits apartment block in Uman, Ukraine, killing at least 4 people. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan thanks Russian President Vladimir Putin for his help on Turkish nuclear plant. Plus, China to deepen and expand military ties with Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Rescue efforts are underway after Russian missile hit an apartment block in Uman in Ukraine. Emergency crews searched the remains of the apartment building. A Russian missile tore through it overnight. Ukraine's national police say at least 4 people have been killed and 17 others wounded. The attacks come as Ukrainian forces are expected to soon launch an offensive with new military equipment, including tanks from its Western allies, after Russian forces made little headway in a winter offensive. Meanwhile, air raid sirens were heard blaring in Kyiv in the early hours of today as Russia attacked the cities in a wide arc across Ukraine, killing at least 2 people. Audio of the sirens was captured on video from social media that shows a deserted street in Kyiv as the Ukrainian capital was rocked by explosions. There were no details on what had been struck in Kyiv or any damage and casualties. The city's military administration says anti-aircraft units were in operation. The attack comes a day after the Kremlin said it would welcome anything that could bring the end of the conflict closer, referring to a telephone call between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In the meantime, at least 1 person has been injured after a house and apartment building was shelled in the Russian-controlled Donetsk region. A local resident, his name is Nikolai Danko, whose house in the village of Pentelimontkva was badly damaged by shelling, said his wife is in the hospital. Another resident said she had not seen anything like this latest round of shelling. Local residents blamed the Ukrainian army for the shelling. However, there was no immediate Ukrainian response. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the Russian drone industry could soon be worth 1 trillion rubles. That's about $12.26 billion once a plan to boost production is put in place, given the vehicle's versatility. Late last year, President Putin says Russia must increase its own output of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and create infrastructure for their widespread use in military and civilian applications. He ordered a strategy for drone development through 2030. President Putin said he and executives involved in drone production had looked over figures that showed the industry could be in the near future worth around 500 billion rubles. President Putin, who spoke after touring an industrial park in Moscow, which has been specially designed to manufacture drones, said UAVs could be used in virtually every part of the economy. While Russia already produces a number of drones, they are not very advanced, and Moscow has been chiefly using Iranian-made Shahed unmanned aerial vehicles in its attacks on Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan have held talks by telephone. That's according to both officers, before the 2 countries marked the inauguration of Turkey's first nuclear power reactor. The Akuyu nuclear power plant in Turkey's southern Mersin province has been built by Russia's state nuclear energy company Rosatom. Erdogan thanked President Putin during their call for his help on the power plant. They also discussed the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the situation in Ukraine. Putin said they agreed to deepen economic trade and agricultural cooperation. He says the 2 countries were working on an initiative by Erdogan to send flour made from Russian grain to countries that needed it. Both presidents took part virtually in a ceremony marking the loading of nuclear fuel into the first power unit at Akuyu. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol told U.S. lawmakers that it's necessary to speed up trilateral cooperation with Japan and the United States to counter increasing North Korean nuclear threats, and says the world must not shy away from promoting freedom for the North. Yoon, on the fourth day of a state visit to mark the 70th anniversary of the U.S.-South Korean alliance, also vowed in a speech to a joint meeting of Congress that South Korea would actively work to safeguard the freedom of the people of Ukraine and support their reconstruction efforts. He was greeted to a standing ovation and repeated loud cheers in a packed House of Representatives chamber by members of the House and the Senate. He paid tribute to the U.S. sacrifice to defend freedom against communism in the 1950-1953 Korean War and its partnership with Seoul since the end of the war.
The Korean people rose from the ruins of war to build a thriving nation. And at every step, America has stood together with Korea. We have many reasons to celebrate our platinum anniversary. We had no guarantees of success when it started. But today, our alliance is stronger than ever, more prosperous together, and more connected like no other. Indeed, it has been the linchpin safeguarding our freedom, peace, and prosperity. We have, for so long, protected democracy and the rule of law with our blood and sweat. We must work together and fight the forces of falsehood and deception that seek to destroy democracy and the rule of law. But even as we walked in unison for freedom for 70 years, there is one regime determined to pursue a wrong path. That is North Korea. The difference is stark between Seoul, that chose freedom and democracy, and Pyongyang, that chose dictatorship and communism. North Korea has abandoned freedom and prosperity and dismissed peace. North Korea's nuclear program and missile provocations pose a serious threat to the peace on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. To deter its reckless behavior, the alliance must stand united with determination. As President Reagan once said, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. We must make his words clear to North Korea. Yesterday, President Biden and I agreed to strengthen the U.S. extended deterrence. Along with close Korea-U.S. coordination, we need to speed up Korea, U.S., Japan trilateral security cooperation to counter increasing North Korean nuclear threat. Thank you. My government will respond firmly to provocations, but at the same time, we will keep the door open for dialogue on North Korea's denuclearization. Last year, I proposed the audacious initiative. It will significantly improve North Korea's economy and livelihood. All Pyongyang has to do is to stop its nuclear program and begin a substantive denuclearization process.
President of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol. India's defense minister has accused China of eroding the entire basis of ties between the two countries by violating bilateral agreements, a reference to a nearly three-year-old standoff involving thousands of soldiers stationed along their disputed border in the eastern Ladakh region. Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh met with visiting Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu and had frank discussions about the developments in the India-China border, as well as bilateral relations. According to India's Defense Ministry, there was no immediate comment on the talks from the Chinese side. India says the deployment of a large number of Chinese troops, their aggressive behavior, and attempts to unilaterally alter the border status quo violates agreements between the two countries. The violations have eroded the entire basis of bilateral relations. A clash 3 years ago in the Ladakh region killed 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers. It turned into a long-running standoff in the rugged mountainous area where each side has stationed tens of thousands of military personnel backed by artillery, tanks, and fighter jets. Meanwhile, China says it will work with Pakistan's military to further deepen and expand the two nations' mutual interests and jointly protect regional peace and stability. A statement by the Chinese Defense Ministry said Zhang Yuzai, the vice chairman of China's Central Military Commission, made the comments during his meeting with Pakistan's Army Chief General Syed Asim Munir, who is on his maiden visit to Beijing, noting that China and Pakistan are all whether strategic cooperative partners and close friends. Zhang says that no matter how the international situation changes, China always gives Pakistan priority in its neighborhood diplomacy. Another statement released by the Pakistan Army Media Wing, the Inter-Services Public Relations, ISPR, says Munir was given a warm welcome and presented with a guard of honor upon his arrival at the People's Liberation Army headquarters in Beijing on Wednesday. ISPR says Munir will hold further meetings with military officials in China to enhance the long-standing relations between the two militaries during his 4-day visit. Now, let's talk to Ambassador Joseph Ayalogu, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva, who joins us from London. It's good to have you with us this morning.
Yes, good morning, Lamide. Good to see you again.
Same here. Ambassador, I saw a picture just this morning of the reactions of the people in the area called Uman, where the latest missile strikes from Russia hit. I saw the photograph of a woman. She was in shock looking at the damage and the destruction. Her visage, her face, her demeanor, her persona, everything was enveloped with grief. Now, that has been the experience of the civilians in Ukraine who are not amongst the now about 10 million people who are displaced from Ukraine who fled the country because of the war. But we have the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, just saying, I think today or yesterday, that during their next summit in July in Lithuania, that they will be unveiling a plan for a multi-year conflict assistance package for Ukraine. So it appears NATO, do you think NATO is giving up on trying to end this war quickly? Or do you think NATO is standing on the side of just wanting to help Ukraine keep fighting while casualties such as the one I've mentioned keep occurring?
Well, I believe, of course, from various statements, affirmations, and what they've done so far, that NATO is committed to, well, to keeping Ukraine going, or keeping Ukraine in a position where it is not smothered by by Russia, the Russia offensive. Of course, we are dealing with a very strong power here, and the offensive continues. And as long as it continues, there would be casualties like we are seeing. And there would also be need to address the requirements of ameliorating the effects of the war. I think that's what's happening now. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that NATO is not committed to supporting Ukraine in this war effort. At least they have consistently reaffirmed that they would.
Ambassador, I know it's a stretch, but do you think NATO is warmongering? You know that the adage, the person that is wearing the shoe is one that knows where it pinches. They don't seem to be in any way trying to speak with Russia or have any mediation talks with Russia at this point.
Well, you know how this war started and what the issues are. I think, simply put, it's that Russia, for whatever reason, Putin has decided that the way to go about it is to attack Ukraine without provocation, at least without a tangible, practical provocation, except the one that has been trumped up by Putin, who wants to protect what he sees as his special area of interest. But we know that the rules of global relationship is that there should be a respect for territorial integrity of acknowledged sovereign countries existing now. So respect for their space, but there hasn't been that. Russia has broken that rule, global rule. So NATO is, of course, trying to support Ukraine, that is fighting an existential war. We wouldn't say NATO is warmongering if there wasn't this aggression. Everybody would have just been managing and going on and doing their diplomacy and talking over probably economic and social issues and so on. NATO wouldn't be finding any need to fight a war. NATO is only a defense pact, a defense system. So just to the question of whether there is NATO is warmongering and so I wouldn't say so. Of course, the issues to talk about is just the issue of aggression towards Ukraine. And if Putin is ready to talk about it, and the only way we can know that he's ready is that he's talking about withdrawing his aggression, he's withdrawing his troops, then everybody will be talking, and I'm sure the international community would just make sure that NATO continues to talk with Russia over it. But the issue that should be spoken about is the issue of is Russia withdrawing or not? Is it continuing in its effort to effect a military subjugation of another country? That is it. These are the plain issues.
Ambassador, let's throw South Korea and North Korea into the mix. Their historic hatred for each other is something that has been a quandary for me, because we know how united they are, biologically speaking, that is North and South Korea. But this visit by the president of South Korea and I think it's the second state visit, official state visit, during President Biden's tenure, which shows the importance with which his presence in America is held by the Biden administration, presupposes that they consider South Korea very important. Now, it's not directly related to the Russian invasion, but maybe can you give us an insight into how the bigger picture will aid or abet or otherwise this conflict in Ukraine, given the nuclear threats by North Korea and the nuclear warnings by Russia?
Well, of course, you know that following the Korean War and the split up of what was Korea into North and South, and both taking different ideological positions, communist and all that, dictatorship on the North, and of course the South, basic democracy and all that, and of course attracting the various supports, either where you're talking of America supporting the South and so on. And the North Korean administration managed to upscale the mix by having a policy of nuclearization. So that has actually added to the problem between the North and South, and the problem between North Korea and the rest of the world that would want to see a demilitarized global system. And you would say that North Korean leader now is playing it like the rogue elephant, and especially with the issue of nuclear capacity, and that's and that worries the U.S. That worries quite a lot of countries, because it appears that with the internal system in North Korea, there might not even be a civilian control or a democratic control on how their nuclear capacity can be used. So that is well, I would say that is quite a big worry, because quite a number of other countries that have nuclear capacity, except one or two, there are mechanisms for control, but a few, including North Korea, we don't see that possibility of an internal control system. So can you imagine if they decide to unleash their capacity to use their nuclear warheads? It will be another challenge, global challenge.
Ambassador, we just reported as well the problems that India is having with China concerning the dispute along the border, which has troops stationed on either side. But I want you to comment on this in the light of the phone call that President Xi Jinping had with the President Zelensky. It appears that they were very upbeat about it. And I was thinking that, all of a sudden, one phone call and there's a ray of hope. You know, China was touted to be the bad guy supporting Russia. Now, all of a sudden, this phone call has the Ukrainians themselves saying that China is, they're very happy with the phone call and everything that China said, what Xi Jinping said to Zelensky, the first wartime phone call, etc. So could you enlighten us, if you will, on whether this indeed will be a shift in China's position to help bring a peaceful end to the war, and not at the end of the day ending up with Ukraine losing its territory?
Well, China wants to play the role of a broker, peace broker, and had some discussions with Putin, and put up some proposals. Even though looking at those proposals, they appear to be a lot more of a tap on the knuckle to Russia. It didn't specifically denounce the attack on Ukraine. They criticized the embargoes on Russia and so on. So it didn't initially appear to be some business to work with in terms of bringing about peace. But a call to Zelensky is also in line with its intention to broker peace. Of course, it makes sense for Zelensky to be happy about it. At least it shows that China would probably not do anything to upset Ukrainian sovereignty to the point of, let's say, for instance, even providing support for Russia, which has been on the card for some time, and there's some worry about that. We'll just watch and see what China can really do with this its effort to broker peace in Ukraine. We don't know whether that would mean giving up on some of the territories, or rather making Ukraine give up on some of the territories that is already lost. That would be a hard sell for Ukraine, and it may not be accepted. Perhaps, maybe just to the point of letting Crimea go to Russia, and then getting Russia out of the rest of Ukraine territory, and then making sure it keeps away from that, from those areas. I think I recall that China did provide guarantees for Ukraine much earlier over issue of nuclear attacks. And that, of course, justifies why Ukraine can see China as an honest broker, at least making an effort, that we can see this as diplomacy trying to address the issues surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, Ambassador, making Ukraine give up any of its territories will be a very hard pill to swallow for Kiev. Thank you so much for your insights on these issues. Ambassador Joseph Ayalugu, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva, speaking to us from London. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Lamide. Have a good day.
You too. After the break, delivered as promised, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine has received 98% of promised combat vehicles. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO allies and partner countries have provided Ukraine with 1,550 armored vehicles and 230 tanks to form units and help it retake territory from Russian forces. Mr. Stoltenberg says that the deliveries constituted more than 98% of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine during Russia's invasion and war, giving Kyiv a bigger punch as it contemplates launching a counteroffensive. More than 30,000 troops are estimated to make up the new brigades. Ukraine's allies have also sent vast amounts of ammunition, and some NATO partner countries such as Sweden and Australia have also provided armored vehicles. NATO member countries have also provided anti-aircraft systems and artillery, while Poland and the Czech Republic have given Soviet-built MiG-29 aircraft. Stoltenberg emphasized this unprecedented military support to Ukraine, but cautioned that we should never estimate Russia, in his words. United States prosecutors have accused the Air National Guardsman suspected of leaking secret Pentagon files of keeping an arsenal of weapons and making violent threats online, arguing that the man, Jack Teixeira, should remain in custody pending trial. In a court filing late on Wednesday, authorities said 21-year-old Teixeira may still have access to secret documents and will pose a serious flight risk if released on bail. And during a court hearing on Thursday, a U.S. federal judge did not make an immediate ruling on whether he should remain in detention or be given or granted conditional release. The judge, David Hennessy, expressed concern, however, that the 21-year-old's knowledge of classified material might be valuable to a foreign government, noting that the defendant had copied some of the documents but may still remember the secret information reasonably well. Charged with unauthorized disclosure of classified national defense information in violation of the Espionage Act, he faces 25 years in prison and potentially far more. Meanwhile, Russian authorities have denied detained U.S. journalist Ivan Gershkovich a consular visit. That's according to the Foreign Ministry in Moscow. Mr. Gershkovich, who is a 31-year-old reporter with the Wall Street Journal, was detained last month on espionage charges. He denies those allegations. He appeared in a Moscow court on the 18th of April and is detained at a former KGB prison. It comes after the U.S. refused to grant visas to a group of Russian reporters, a move Moscow called provocative. The reporters were supposed to travel to New York to cover Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to the UN Security Council. The Russian Foreign Ministry described the decision to deny the visas as an act of sabotage. It says the U.S. had denied the visas to impede normal journalistic work and summoned a senior U.S. diplomat to issue a note of protest. Now we're pleased to speak with Professor David Awurawo, Professor and Head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. It's good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you for having me on the program.
I'd like to begin with the leaked Pentagon documents, which this guardsman, who's 21 years old, has been charged for. Now, they're saying that he'll be held because he has weapons, an arsenal, etc. The problem that some have with this arrest of this man and the fact that he leaked these documents over such a long period of time without any of the defense authorities in America noticing, and this being the Pentagon, the United States Defense Headquarters, smacks of, for some people, that this may be just him being used as a fall guy. He's just being used as a scapegoat. And there's a gray area of how he got access to that information in the first place. He's a National Guardsman. It's not even been indicated by the U.S. whether he has any training in IT, and he broke into the passwords of, and we understand also there are multiple gateways that you need to pass, multiple codes you'll need to crack to have illegal access to that sort of information. So what is your view of how the U.S. is treating this issue of the leaked Pentagon documents that has implicated the U.S. as spying on Ukraine and other nations, amongst other things?
Well, to begin with, the leak of the documents is an embarrassment to the United States. The fact that, access to these very important documents and information took place over a very long time before it was detected. And also the information contained and how the information has been put out. Everything together is an embarrassment to the United States. I do not think that the conspiracy theory that the United States is just trying to make up something from the leaks and arresting the young man, is deliberate to maybe confuse Russia or something. I do not think that does not make sense, really. Why would the United States want to leak documents that reveal important information regarding the United States' relations with Ukraine and many of its allies? Why would the United States want to release information that indicate that the U.S. is spying on its allies? And why would the U.S. want to reveal some very important issues regarding strategy, in the Ukraine-Russian war? What Ukraine is planning or what they are planned, with Ukraine. And why
Professor, may I jump in? Hold on, Professor. Sorry, may I jump in? If there was a rogue general, or excuse me, a rogue operative, or when I say rogue, I mean someone who does not support the U.S. policy against Ukraine in the Pentagon, and using this young man as a fall guy, whether directly or indirectly, whether he knows he's being used or not, could that be a situation where that could happen? That is to say, therefore, not the United States, but people in the United States who are not sympathetic to the way the United States is treating the war.
Good. Yeah. This second perspective is a possibility. It is possible that some individuals within the system who do not support the U.S. position in the war, or who think the U.S. is giving too much, to support Ukraine, and want to embarrass the U.S. and maybe force the government to change policy. It is well possible. But what I think does not make sense is that the United States itself, as a government, has tried to put these documents out to confuse Russia or something, as some analysts have said. That does not make sense. But this second perspective you have just presented is possible. There are some elements within the United States military system not supportive of, the way the U.S. has gone about the war, supporting Ukraine, could have done this using this young man. Again, because, as you have pointed out, this young man, the capacity to be able to, break into and gain access to this information is limited. And so this second perspective, yes, it makes sense. But that first one, that the U.S. as a country, decided to put all of this together to deceive Russia, that first perspective does not make it. But the second one you have just pointed out, yes, that is a possibility.
Okay, Professor, let's stay with the issue for just one moment. And there's something that bothers me concerning the disclosures in this document. There are allegations that the United States, the UK, Latvia, and I forget another country or two, have sent special forces into Ukraine, and that those special forces are operating in Ukraine as we speak. Of course, that will bring a whole new dimension to the war if it is true and proven to be true that the U.S. have their special forces. We know special forces by their nature are usually limited in number, but the scope and the damage they can do is really great. But we also know that Russia had sent its special forces, the Spetsnaz, as we heard, from the beginning of the war to help to accelerate the quick breaking down of the Ukrainian people. But it did not work. So therefore, they had to keep sending more forces, and there were so many casualties as it's been reported amongst the special forces of Russia. My concern now is that, surreptitious as it may be, do you think that this will just bring a very terrible dimension to the war, where special forces of these countries are continually sent into the conflict and further exacerbating the situation?
Yes, it is very concerning. It is very possible, it is very likely that the information contained in those leaked documents indicating that these countries have sent special forces to Ukraine is possible. I mean, there's high probability that that is true. Many of the data gathered, the intelligence gathered, the use of some of these weapons that are very sophisticated have been sent to Ukraine. There are individuals that are required to enable the Ukrainians to have capacity to utilize them. Intelligence is key, and the West, led by the US, has assisted Ukraine in all of this. So that information in the leaked documents that special forces have been sent is most probably true. In fact, there is a high probability that is what has happened. But it's unfortunate. That's again why we say it's unfortunate that the documents have been leaked. Yes, the possibility of exacerbating the conflict is there. But Russia has over time said that it is fighting a proxy war of the United States. It has accused the U.S. of direct confrontation. The U.S. has tried to manage to, stay away, pretend that it's just supporting Ukraine to defend itself, but it's not involved directly. But this information in this leaked document seems to be confirming Russia's position at the beginning, and it's increasingly bringing Russia into confrontation with, the United States. But Ukraine is the worst for it. Have you not seen the devastation?
Yes.
It has made Russia to scale up, its military engagements. And of course, Ukraine is also fighting back, trying to capture back some areas that Russia, had captured earlier on. And Ukraine is in tatters. So, I mean, the leaked documents, the sending of special forces, all of these things have complicated the conflict and, expanded the destruction of Ukraine. And, as I've said several times, in my comments on this war, the earlier both parties realized that neither side will be able to win this war in a decade, the better, so that serious diplomacy can begin to take place to end the war. But all of these special forces, all of these big powers getting involved, have only complicated the conflict and worsened the condition of Ukraine, where the fighting is taking place.
Yes, Professor, and 429 days to the day, which is today, of this conflict is way too much in the view of those who've lost their lives, in the view of the casualties, in the view of the lives that have been changed forever in this conflict. Thank you so much for your insight on these issues, Professor David Awurawo, Professor and Head of Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. Thank you for coming on the program today.
Thank you very much, Olamide.
When we return, getting ready. Russian military hardware seen in Moscow for May the 9th parade rehearsal. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry said only its full implementation can save the Black Sea grain deal from collapse, reaffirming Moscow's dissatisfaction with an accord that aims to prevent a global food crisis. The deal, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey last July, allows Ukrainian grain trapped by the conflict to be safely exported from the country's Black Sea ports. But Russia has repeatedly said it will not allow the deal to be extended beyond May the 18th unless the West removes obstacles to Russian grain and fertilizer exports. Russia and Ukraine are major grain producers, but Moscow says part of the deal that is meant to allow it to export its own agricultural goods via the Black Sea are not being honored. Although Russia's agricultural exports have not been explicitly targeted by Western sanctions, Moscow says restrictions on its payments, logistics, and insurance industries imposed over its military action in Ukraine have created a barrier to the export of its grains and fertilizers. Ukrainian producers said issues with Ukraine exports to Central Europe will happen again unless the EU sets out a clear position on its food import policy for the next 5 years. Some EU member states have imposed temporary bans on Ukrainian agricultural product after an excess affected the local market and angered the farmers. A man named Alex Lisitsa, who heads the Association of Ukrainian Agribusiness Club, said the main problem for most European countries is agrarian Ukraine, which will enter the EU with 30 million hectares, that's about 74 million acres of land. Lisitsa says Kyiv must negotiate with Brussels rather than separate states, and that a long-term solution was needed that will last 5 years when EU membership talks are expected. Now, with me in the studio at the moment is Laddie Williams, our business correspondent, to give us an added perspective to the business dimension of the conflict in Ukraine. I wanted to begin first with this grain issue that we're just reporting. So Russia is saying, in essence, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You're stopping me from getting my grain, from making money through the export of my grain by some of the sanctions you're imposing on logistics and insurance and payments. Therefore, I'm not going to extend the agreement to have Ukrainian grain.
Deal.
Yeah. So how does this work?
Definitely, it's definitely impacted the markets now, the grain markets. We've seen that seesaw movement in the market because everyone is holding their breath now, wondering what's going to happen next when May 18 actually hits. Are we going to get a renewal, or is that the end? And we've seen Russia; they've been sticking to their guns, and they're expecting the U.S. and the allies to actually try and lift some of these sanctions. Hopefully, that happens. But at the end of the day, from their body language, it's looking like that might not, happen going forward. But luckily, we're getting, supplies, grain supplies from other parts. We've seen, in Canada, they've raised their production levels to about a record level not seen in a while, and that's helping to shore up all that drop we might see coming from Ukraine and Russia, because they're a big, supplier to the global market, and we know how MENA countries, Middle East and North African countries rely on, wheat coming from Ukraine and Russia, even right here in Nigeria too. So at the end of the day, it is impacting the market, but we're getting some positive, forecasts from, say, the World Bank now, saying that, going forward, we've seen prices of commodities drop from record highs, when Russia invaded Ukraine. We've seen about a 30% drop in prices, and the expectations that this drop is going to continue in 2023, hopefully. And at the end of the day, we know that this also hinges on what happens with that deal. But yeah, we've seen lower prices, from energy prices to grain prices. They have all come down from their record highs in 2022. It's a good sign. And looking at this World Bank commodity price outlook for April, right, it's looking quite, positive at this point. It's looking like prices will remain low. We've seen fertilizer prices that, skyrocketed in 2022, and that fed into, higher food prices. So we've seen de-ammonium prices, that's expected to drop even more in 2023, according to the World Bank report. That's going to drop about 25%, this year. So seeing fertilizer prices come down and seeing the forecast that they will still, remain lower in 2023 is a good sign, for grains and the food market.
And what's getting a negative forecast, as you've pointed out here, is that the Russian economy is, because of the record worker shortage. I guess this is all with the backdrop of the fact that young Russian men are being conscripted into service. Yeah. Could that be one of the reasons there's a shortage of people to work?
It's one of the major reasons. Obviously, this is a country at war, and we expect that they'll need men to actually fight this war, and they've had to, mobilize, some of their population to actually fight this war. They've lost about 200,000 troops in this war. That's from Russia. That's the casualties we're seeing. And, when that happens, obviously that will cause, that will shake the workforce, of any country. And we're already seeing that happening in Russia. And we've seen a lot of Russians actually leave Russia for a number of reasons. Some because of the sanctions from the US and their allies. Some have had to, leave Russia because of that. Some don't agree with the war. And this is a gray, economy, talking about Russia at this point. So we're seeing they also have, a lowering population, talking about Russia coming from, where they are. So all of that, feeding into that workforce, and we're seeing that play out right now. A report from Commissat shows that the worker availability, that has dropped to negative 18 points. That's the lowest since they started tracking the numbers since 1998. So at the end of the day,
population.
Yeah, that's the worker availability, at this point. So all of that, is playing into that workforce market at this time, and it is expected to get worse if the war, continues to escalate at this point. So at the end of the day, they need peace so that they can have their workforce back, at the normal level and can keep that economy going.
Thank you, Ladi. And obviously, it cuts across men and women, both genders. Exactly. Thank you so much, Ladi. More business news, obviously not only of the Ukrainian kind in business news.
Well, the Nigerian kind.
Nigerian kind. After this program on Business Morning, Ladi Williams, our business correspondent. Now, Ukraine Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says he has invited the Pope Francis, to visit Ukraine and discuss Kiev's formula for peace during talks at the Vatican. He also told a news conference in Italy that a phone call between the leaders of China and Ukraine on Wednesday had been very productive and could prove very positive, beginning for future relations. In December, President Zelensky set up a 10-point peace plan, which includes securing grain exports and restoring Ukraine's territories. And finally, on the program, the Russian armed forces brought some of its military hardware to central Moscow ahead of a nighttime rehearsal of Red Square for the annual World War II Victory Day parade next month. President Vladimir Putin is expected to lead events in Moscow on May the 9th, marking the 78th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. But as in 2022, this year's Victory Day parade will be overshadowed by the conflict in Ukraine, which Russia calls a special military operation. Since 2008, Victory Day parades have become a muscular display not only of marching battalions, but also of Russia's latest weaponry, including warplanes, tanks, and nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's where we'll call it a day for today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Please join us again next week for Monday as we continue to do so. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a great weekend.